It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and I'm grateful in this episode. If you remember back a while back, we had our friend Portia Louder here on the show, and since she has been on, and by the way, check out her book Living Louder. Uh, she has multiple times sent me text messages that says, "You know who you need to visit with." And certainly Travis Ritchie, one of our more popular episodes, is one that she recommended to us. This episode that you're about to listen to is another Portia recommendation. I feel like I should get a logo or something to go on the artwork for the episodes that Portia tells us about. It is Mark Hugentobler. Mark, thanks for being here.
I'm sure glad to be here. Thanks for having me on, Rich.
And I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. Obviously, if you know anything about Portia, or you listen to that episode, or if you haven't, find it in the show notes, go and listen to it, and then come back and listen to this. She talks a lot about her time that she was in prison, and the lessons that she learned, and certainly has come on the other side of that experience to have a lot of empathy and compassion for those who would find themselves on the other side of the law. And this conversation today deals with those same people. Mark, I don't even know how to sort of onboard this, but if you would tell us a little bit about yourself, and then how your path has intersected not only with Portia but with those that are incarcerated.
Well, great. I grew up in southern Utah. White picket fence life, had a good life, great parents, great friends, grew up in a small community.
Now,
Riding dirt bikes.
When you say small, hold on. What are we talking? Are we talking like St. George small, or are we talking
Oh,
like
no.
Paraguna small?
Yeah, closer to Paraguna, 3,000 people.
Okay.
A little town called Monticello, southeastern Utah, if you've ever heard of that place. It's about 60 miles south of Moab.
Okay.
So it's it's really very remote, but it's a great place. At least it was for us. Hunting and fishing, riding dirt bikes, water skiing, snow skiing, anything a kid could dream of doing in his free time was available to us. And then as I got a little bit older, we got into high school sports, football and basketball and track. I just had a great life, good friends, great parents, great mentors. So I grew up in that world, and I was a knothead kid. We got into some trouble, but we never crossed any serious lines. We were mischievous and made some mistakes, but we never hurt anybody. But it was a great life.
Yeah, it's just being a kid, right? You do those things that you go, boy, I should have never done that. Or you look back and go, I can't believe we did that and survived. But, it's growing up.
Yeah, it is. But it was a good life. And I grew up went on a mission for my church, went to France for a couple of years, and it was a great experience, very hard. Got back. I grew up, I wanted to be a basketball coach.
Okay.
I really wanted to play, but I wasn't good enough to play past junior college. And I probably wasn't quite good enough to play there, but I did. I came home for my mission. I went to Snow College. I was there, and that's where I met my wife.
Okay.
Wonderful lady. She stuck with me in spite of the fact that I became a basketball coach.
Yeah.
Which is a kind of a story in and of itself. But we've followed that. We followed that dream for 23 years in two communities. Had a nice family, great kids, 4 boys and a little girl. They're all, my girl is 22 now.
So empty nest. Now it's just you and your wife doing the second, or I guess third phase of life. Yeah.
I'm not sure what phase it is, but we're in the middle of it, and we're trying to enjoy it. But that was my life. So I was a basketball coach, and really pretty successful. We won our fair share, and my kids got to play for me. At least the 3 older boys did. I retired before my younger boy played. But we were successful. What's that?
It sounds to me just like every success story, right? You did the thing, you had the good life, you found the love of your life, you're pursuing a thing, and then you're able to obtain it, and then able to cultivate the great family life that you were able to experience for your kids. You did that. So where does this story go in a different non-basketball coach way?
Well, I retired from coaching basketball and was the assistant principal at the high school or here in Manti where I worked. And being a basketball coach in a public school setting is kind of unique because public school teachers kind of have a certain personality. It's a good personality. It's nurturing and it's warm and it's it's just a different kind of perspective on life than a basketball coach who aggressive and focused and attentive, living a life with intention and purpose and driven. So it wasn't uncommon for me to have a little bit different perspective than most teachers. But we got along real well, and I think we all understood that. And I made great friends. My faculty the people I worked with in the faculty had good feelings and good camaraderie. But as the assistant principal, I was working with a principal who didn't see eye to eye with me. And I want to say who was right and who was wrong. It's just I was
but we know today who was right and who was wrong. I'm teasing.
I wasn't one to sit in my office.
Okay.
I'm a pretty big guy, 6'2", 225 pounds, but I'm kind of a chihuahua. I have very high energy. And so I wasn't one to sit in my office and do paperwork. I wanted to be out working with students and working with faculty. And he took offense to that. He kind of thought I was trying to get his job. And I'm also a very loyal person, so that isn't even possible. I try to be loyal to him, but he was very upset with me. And I was, I'm a maverick.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair statement. Anyway, being a basketball coach, there's a lot of great things about it in a small community, but there's also some challenges. You make enemies.
Sure.
You have to cut kids from your team. I probably cut 20 kids from my basketball team every year. Now, in a small community, there's several communities that go to our high school of probably about 10,000 people, 8,000 people. You start cutting 10 or 20 kids a year, and the list of people who probably aren't your friend adds up pretty quick. And most of the people that I work with are good people. They saw it, and they knew their kid was where he belonged, and if he didn't make it, he didn't make it. But there were some who just couldn't accept it.
Well, and in that community, I know for some of those, they feel like that's their ticket sort of out of that community. If they're going to be able to play or be able to afford college, it's going to be on some sort of sports scholarship. And so at the point that they try in the thing that they feel like they're good at, and you say, no, you're not that good at that, they almost feel like it's a bigger ramifications than just, oh, he's not playing JV this year.
Yeah. But most of the people really understood. There really wasn't a lot of problem. But the school board, every school district is run by a publicly elected school board. And there were two members of that school board who were not fans of mine, who were not my fans. They were, in fact, just the opposite. One of them had actually been after me for 10 years, 15 years, a long time. And anyway, that school board got together with the principal and based on some of the things that I did, the decisions I made, and they decided that they were going to get rid of me. And so one day I'm at the end of the school year, my third year as assistant principal, I think this was in 2011, superintendent calls me to his office downtown. When I say downtown, the high school's on the edge of town, school district is the middle of town, and I drove 4.5 blocks.
Yeah. So, no stoplights. I got to go downtown. Should I walk or should I drive? I'll get there at the same time.
So anyway, I get there, I walk in, he's a good man. And I walked in and I could see by the look on his face, he had something serious on his mind. And he sat me down and says, Mark, I got some bad news. The school board's sending you to prison. And I didn't want to go. The principal, I need to throw in this piece. People don't realize this, at least in Utah. The prison education programs are under the umbrella of the local school district.
Oh, really? No, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So there's a prison in Gunnison, Utah, which is within our school district boundaries. And so the people that work there are employees. The people that work there as educators are employees of the school district. And it wasn't uncommon. For example, I was sent to replace a guy that was there, and he had been the principal at the high school that I was working at before, went to the prison for 2-3 years.
Okay.
And then when I went there, he was moved to the middle school in Ephraim in our district. So it wasn't uncommon for people to go in and out of that, the prison system. For various reasons that happened. But
The obvious joke and or question is how much is the high school different from the prison? But maybe I'll just throw that out there as far as, you know, to be able to be so interchangeable. It's like, what are we saying about either one of those then, I guess?
Well, the education's supposed to be the same, but I found that it really wasn't. But I don't know. That's just the way it's set up. I didn't I didn't create the system. So anyway, I didn't want to go. The guy that had been there before, he actually did want to go. It's kind of an escape. It was an easier job. You didn't have as much pressure. In fact, nobody even knew you were there, and nobody cared, honestly. I didn't want to go. That wasn't my personality. I was not happy.
Yeah,
I was very upset. I'd driven past that prison hundreds of times, and either I drove by without a thought, or I drove by and thought, those are the derelicts of society. Those are the dregs of society. They deserve what they get. Dirt bags, all of those thoughts. And I regret that now, but I throw that out there as important because I think most people kind of think that at some level or another. They think, those guys, the system is doing all they can to help them, and they don't care, and they're never going to change, and they're just a bunch of criminals.
Yeah.
And that was my perspective, and I did not want to do it. So I went, but I didn't.
But you didn't have a choice, because
I was
the other thing I know about small town living is, like, there are only so many jobs, and if you're only sort of in a particular kind of profession, it's like, okay, well, there are 4 other sort of jobs kind of like this, maybe, and I've done 2 of them, and they don't want me in that one, so they're giving me a chance. I guess I go and you seem to me to be like I'll make the best out of it kind of guy.
Well, I hope that's the case, but you're right. We could have moved. I could have gotten another job in a school district in another community. I don't think that would have been hard at all. But we didn't want to move. We were actually just in the process of building a new home, and we love it here. My wife's parents live here. It's a great place. So anyway, the superintendent says, Mark, if you'll just bite the bullet, go and do your time. It'll be a couple of years. These school board members are going to be up for election that are not your fan. And when he was confident that they would be replaced by ballot. And he said, when they're gone, we'll bring you back. And so I said, okay, I'll go. I can do a couple of years.
So a particular question about this prison, though, are these are adults, right? These are not children, but it's they're given the same sort of curriculum. Tell me about the actual people that are incarcerated at this place.
Okay, they're the same people in Gunnison as there are in Salt Lake.
Okay, so all adults. These are anything from white collar to blue collar to
violent.
Okay.
Just the whole gambit.
So exactly like a high school,
only safer.
Yeah.
I've told people when I was there, I says, I felt a lot safer in prison sometimes I did in high school. Yeah, I kept waiting for some big football player to come up and decide to want to prove how big a man he was, and so I'd get some kind of altercation. But I was never. Well, at first I was kind of nervous, but once I realized the situation, I was never afraid, never nervous while I was there. But you're right. The curriculum's actually somewhat different. It's supposed to be the same, but under the circumstance, the way it is, there's no money for books, for example. Anyway, I got there, and I thought, well, I'm just going to do my time. The guy that was before me says, Mark, this is an easy job. You just show up and you monitor you create schedules and you monitor and you're done.
So I'm actually not as familiar. So I want to just ask some questions, and I'm assuming that
absolutely.
A lot of people listening are like this. So when you say create schedules, I know, I guess, based from my TV and movie watching, that the majority of the time, those that are in prison, they have like some time where they're able to be outside, and it's sort of like free-ish time, right? To be able to be outside or to work out or play ball or whatever, right? Time that they're in the yard, if that's even the right thing to call it. But then also,
it is.
You have your sort of daily schedule. Is it like a like a school schedule where it's like, hey, everybody has to kind of be up, and then you're starting, not necessarily like the first thing is like, and the first hour is English, but are they scheduled in such a way that it's like, this is this, then 8 to 9 there's this, then 9 to 11 is this time, and it's all that, or is it they can kind of accomplish any of these things in the countless hours that they'll have while they're
Yeah,
there?
no, that's a great question. The answer is they have a pretty set schedule.
Okay.
For example, they usually get up at 5:30 and have breakfast.
Jeez.
Classes can start as early as 7 o'clock. The school is it was not mandatory. It was by choice. There was programming classes that the prison provided in a different corridor. Yard time, each housing unit had their yard time. They didn't send everybody out to the yard at the same time. Each housing unit would have a time for the yard. So they would go out and have their time outside, or if the weather was bad, they had mini yards that are very big at all, 10 by 20.
Oof.
So they really couldn't get out much. But yeah, but there was a schedule, and they were expected to be where they were supposed to be when they were supposed to be there. Some of them worked, so they had a work schedule. Some of them didn't really do anything. They just sat back in their housing unit and watched TV and played poker and played ping pong. So it just kind of depended, but there was definitely a schedule. And
So
guys,
so education, though, to reiterate what you just said, is an optional thing. So at least the people that are coming to be a part of this have chosen it. It's some sort of privilege that you can engage them on in that sort of way.
at that time it was
Okay.
that way. It was a bit of a privilege. All of the guys, if you didn't hit certain behavioral levels, you wouldn't be allowed to come to education or to programming.
Okay.
So yeah, that was the case. When I went there was 200 and I'm losing my mind. When I went there was 272 students enrolled in our school that first term.
Wow.
So there was 1,800 guys, or well, at the time 1,500 guys in that prison. So a very small portion of them came. The literacy level when I went there was just over the fifth grade.
How
The average.
much? Just to interject here, how much do you think of what brought people there, or in a bigger question, how much of a factor is education, do you feel like, for those that find themselves in prison? Meaning, can you draw a line from, if someone's not educated, that they're more likely to be incarcerated?
I think absolutely,
Okay.
to a certain degree. I think it kind of depends on the education you're defining. But literacy level, for example, Rich, can you imagine not being able to read a road sign? I met men
Yeah.
who could not read.
Hmm.
They were born in America, and they literally could not. They could read road signs because they were one word, but they really were illiterate. The average literacy, when men go to prison, they have to take a literacy test, and the average at the time in Gunnison, the average literacy was just over the fifth grade level. So it was really kind of sad. In fact, when I got there, I was just going to do my time and get out. Within about 3 months, I realized that this is crazy. All these men wandering around playing ping pong, playing poker, playing softball in the yard, just aimless lives. And I started working with some of the men, the inmates that worked in our school. We would hire, at the time there was about 10, 12 tutors that were inmates that would come and help our teachers, like as an aide, if you will. And one of them in particular, named Charles Gordon, I started interviewing or started working with. And I found him to be a fascinating man. In fact, one of the most amazing men I've ever met, intellectually, organizationally, work ethic, just a crazy talented man. And I started looking around thinking, this is a waste. My job is to help. My job is to help change these men so they can get back into society and live good lives. And what we were doing was not even effective. Honestly, it was a waste of everybody's time and money and energy.
Was there a pivotal moment? You're talking about working with Charles Gordon. Was it a time specifically with him, or like one day you went home and you're like, I'm just putting in my time, and then the next morning, as you're putting your clothes on, you're like, and today I'm changing the minds of the world? Like overnight it changed. How did you go from I'm punching the time card? Was there a specific moment where you're like, nope, I'm not doing this way anymore, or what made the change?
Well, I think it was a transition over several weeks to a month or so. I remember first time I came home and says, "Honey, I got it all wrong," and she thought I was crazy because she was very nervous about me going to prison. It's a scary place and it's a
Sure.
terrible place, and I said, "Honey, I got it all wrong. There's a lot of men in there that want to change. They
Mm.
want to learn. They want to become different. They just don't have any path. The system as it exists, and I say this, no, I don't say it tongue in cheek. It was pathetic.
Yeah.
They incarcerate people, but they don't correct people. At least that's the way it used to be.
Mhm.
And the education program was just there.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of woke up. I came to myself. I realized that everything I thought was wrong. The system was not doing everything it could, and these men do want to change. And what I found is, we live in a wonderful state with wonderful people, but for some reason our forgiveness stops at the prison gates.
Mm.
And we're a little less willing to forgive and forget when it comes to these men because we think they can't change. And we kind of have seen that. They get 70% of them, for example, I don't know if you realize this, 95% of them are going to get out of prison.
Mhm.
And over 70% of them are going to go back.
Yeah, the recidivism rate is pretty high. 70%, 7 out of 10.
Yep. And that's crazy. I'm going, we have a perfect incubator for change. We have a perfect scenario to help men change. We just have to create the patterns and we have to create the opportunities and then let them choose. And if I can just tell the short story,
Please.
We started revamping the education system. I started reaching out, working with the housing units, the captains and lieutenants there. And we went from 270 some odd students within just a year. We doubled that to 500.
Hmm.
And when I left in 2018 actually, no, it was 2019. It was before the pandemic. There were over 1,100 men in our school.
Wow.
So we had 2/3 of the men in that prison were directly involved in education. We had developed post-secondary programs. So instead of just teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic on a high school, history, science on a high school level, a lot of these guys completed and they came and we kind of looked and said, what should we do with these guys? Their literacy scores are up in the 10th, 11th grade level. They're doing really good. We've helped them a lot. He says, Mark, let's figure something else out.
Mhm.
So we brought in classes and we did all of this without any money really. And we brought in classes from Weber State, from Salt Lake Community, from Snow College. We created our own industrial trades program. So we taught everything in the book in industrial trades. We had a yard to the west of our corridor. We built a wood shop and we started building sheds and picnic tables and shooting tables and all kinds of different things for people. So we would have inmates come in and learn these skills, and then we would sell those products to the community, and then we'd do some more and use that money to, fund our projects. So we really created a really neat environment. We had 100 guys who were volunteers, 100 men, inmates, and they would give me at least 10 hours of their time every week to come and help us without just non-gratis. And the service and the interest level and the desire to change just was empowering and kind of took over our world. And that's what I found. And I was so baffled and that could be that wrong about something.
I want to take a break right here. I want to come back and I want to when we get back in, I want to talk about what changes for those that are inmates, those that are incarcerated, from what it was like for them before, and then they have this opportunity, and then how things changed for them. We'll get back and do that in the second block of the Cultural Hall. Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember, you can always email us, contact@theculturalhall.com. We love hearing from you. You could be the next Portia to the Cultural Hall. You could say, I know this great guest, and you have to have this person in, and I hope that you do that. Or if you just want to tell us that you like hearing what Mark has to say, or if you have a particular topic, maybe you don't know who the great guest would be, but you're like, you guys should really talk about and then fill in the blank there. You're more than welcome to send that as well. contact@theculturalhall.com. So Mark, you go in and you're this guy that says, you know what, I'm going to do my time. And then you're like, wait a minute, I can really change some lives here. And then you start to see the lives change. If for no other reason, those that are interacting in the program doubles within the first year. What do you think it is about what you brought in, what education brings into the lives of these people that can provide any change, that can make a different life? Like what is it about it that allows any sort of correction, to use that word, to happen?
Well, there's several things. First of all, you kind of got to imagine the situation that I walked into. It was without a better way to describe it, hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
The officers lived a hopeless life. They were babysitting adults. Can you imagine anything worse than babysitting a bunch of men? They were bored. It was a very benign work environment. The inmates were hopeless. They saw no light at the end of the tunnel. They didn't know what was coming next. They could see no way to improve their lives. They just jumped into the criminal mindset, the drugs and the gangs, and gangs run the prison. Corrections, the officers control the gangs, but the gangs really run the prison. And so it was just a hopeless world. And what we did is we provided hope. They didn't trust me at first. They came in dragging their feet, but after about 6 months to a year, seeing the sincere nature of what we're doing, they started to buy in, and the word started to spread. And so we provided hope. And I can't imagine living life without hope.
Do you think that it's because a few things come to my mind, right? Like one is, I think, okay, well, if I couldn't read when I got in, and then, I'm able to read, there's a certain amount of like self-esteem that I go, hey,
absolutely,
I couldn't do this thing, and now I can do this thing, maybe where they had given up on themselves or were hopeless about themselves. To be able to have concrete evidence of something to the contrary. Oh, I'm an illiterate felon. Oh, no, wait, I'm a literate felon. Oh, wait, I'm out of jail. Now I'm a literate contributing member of society. I think that can kind of be part of it, the hope that they give themselves. But how much do you think it is that they just needed someone to know that they were cared for by someone?
Well, I think it's a huge part of it. We live our lives around people who love us and who care for us and who nurture us and who help us grow and who kick us in the butt once in a while.
Yeah.
That's how we live our lives, most people. And they live a life where they just got kicked in the teeth all the time. That was what life was like. They were just getting kicked in the teeth all the time. Any glimmer of hope, any glimmer of change it was like crabs in a bucket. Anybody who wanted to change, whether they were officer, because there are a lot of good people. I need to stop and say this. The officers that I work with, the large majority of them were just good people stuck in a broken system. They were. In fact, I live in the communities with them. I've known them. When I went there as the basketball coach, most of them knew me, because in these small communities, basketball coaches are either, they have notoriety. People know who they are, and they're either famous or infamous.
Yeah.
But and so they're good people. They really are, but they were just stuck in this broken system. And the system is very punitive. It's a prison mentality, not a corrections. So these guys, we were providing hope, and it was good. And the officers that we started working with out in the housing units, they liked what we were doing, because now instead of their guys back in their cells or back in their housing units causing trouble, they're out learning and engaging in something positive, and then they're kind of bringing that back. And no, we didn't completely change the culture of the prison, but we changed a lot of it. And most of the men and women in the housing units that we worked with really appreciated what we did. We patterned a lot of our things. There was a really great program called Strive in one of the housing units in Gunnison. We patterned a lot of what we did. It was an incentive-based program. We patterned a lot of what we did after them. So they had a lot of good ideas. They just crabs in the bucket mentality all over the place.
Explain that in case people don't understand the crabs in a bucket.
Well, you throw a bunch of crabs in a bucket and one of them tries to climb out and one of the other ones reach up and drag him back in. And crabs can't get out of a half full bucket because one of them always drags the other one, the one that's trying to get out back in. And that's kind of the world that is a prison.
That's pretty powerful when you think about that it probably really is like that. Oh, who do you think you are? Come on back, right? And then we on the outside don't do any favors of like, oh yeah, no, I'm sure you're great. Get back to where you need to be. You know, how do you expect us to interact together? Some issues of trust, some issues of ignorance where we just don't know the sort of correction that you know, that individual has been through. I wonder when you there's a missing piece of the story for me that I want to find out a little bit more about, because you go, oh, okay, I'm going to the you know, the correctional facility and I'm going to be in charge of this, and you're like, I'm just going to punch the time card. And then there's the change to, oh, this system is broken. But then there's a part of it you don't know what you're doing. You
don't have a clue.
Yeah. So take me there. What was it like as you learned to be able to help these people? The tough lessons, maybe the ones where you were like, oh man, this was heartbreaking. Take me to maybe one of those, and then one of those great successes where you're like, oh no, this really does make a difference. Heartbreak first, and then they making a difference.
The heartbreak actually came later, and I'd like to tell that at the end.
Oh, okay.
Or afterwards.
Then take me to the successes. Yeah, the heartwarming.
The reason that I was able to succeed is because of my background. As a high school basketball coach, basically your skill set is to empower young men to go play basketball and win games. You can't score a basket by yourself. You can't play guard anybody. You can't do anything except try to teach someone else how to go do that. And so that skill set really came in handy because I got to prison and I took my players, who were inmates. We created an inmate council. We went from 12 tutors up to 48 tutors. We brought in all these men that bought into what we were doing, and literally together they created the programs. They came up with the ideas. These things will work in our environment. These things we can do in our environment, because I had no idea. You know, we created UPrep, which was the college program I described. We created a program called Outreach, where we actually took our education program to the housing units and held classes in those housing units, provided self-study programs in a kind of a group way in those housing units. So we did all kinds of things that the inmates really created. So I just empowered them to come up with these ideas to do stuff. And my job was to go to the warden and get it implemented, get permission to do it. And I had 3 wardens in my 8-year experience, and the first 2 were very cooperative. I just walk in and they said, okay, go try that. Go try that. And the second one was a little less like that, but pretty much, yeah, go try that. Yeah, okay, you can do that. The third one was a little bit different, and that's the sad part of the story that we'll tell a little bit later. But that was it was just joy after joy. I would have men come in, and we didn't make education mandatory, but for them to receive all of the freedoms and all of the opportunities that they wanted in prison, they had to participate in education. So they had a choice. But if they wanted a really good job, and if they wanted, you know, to be able to go to yard at certain times, they had to be involved in education. And when a lot of them would come in and say, I don't want to do this, this is stupid, they'd stand in my office door and they would be upset with me. And it was amazing how many of them 8 months later or a year later would stand in that same door, and instead of cussing me, they would say thanks. And that happened often.
I want to push a little bit more on this. Can you take me to a specific example of a specific individual? I don't need a name. I don't need any sort of identifying thing about that, but I'm sure that as I ask this question, something comes to mind where you had the experience with them initially, and maybe they were receptive or maybe they weren't, but that you know, as they were able to walk, either you walking alongside them aside you, how a life was changed. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
You bet. We had a guy come to my office, and he had just moved to Gunnison. He'd been up in Salt Lake, And it's not like they didn't have all these opportunities, and education was the old way. And he had been told by his liaison, who was an inmate, the requirements for education. And he came down to my office to get what they called an exemption, which basically I could exempt their housing unit captain could exempt them. And they'd come in and whine to me. Well, this guy came in and started whining to me. He was older. He was, Denny was probably in his mid-50s by then.
Okay.
And he didn't need education, and he was a businessman, and he owned a construction company. He had all these things on the streets, and he didn't need any of this stuff. And he was bound and determined to get an exemption. And I said, dude, there's nothing I can do. You've got to go to your housing unit captain to get an exemption, because I don't do it. I don't do exemptions unless there's an educational, if they're intellectually challenged, I can do some exemption stuff. And he says, and I says, if you want exemption, you got to go talk to your captain. The last person that these guys ever want to talk to is their housing unit captain. That is not a good place to be.
Okay.
And he was pretty darn upset, but he was so upset, he says, well, I'm going to go talk to him. So he goes and talks to his captain, and comes back maybe a week later, and he's still mad. He says, my captain won't give me an exemption. I says, why? Okay, then you guess you're going to have your own school. He says, I'm not going to do it. I says, well, it's your choice, Danny, but you've just got to, I'm here to help you. I'm not trying to be a pain. I'm not trying to be hard. Those are your options. So the new term started in a week or so ahead. And so he came and enrolled in school, and he was okay literacy wise. I think, I don't remember exactly. He was a 6th, 7th grade reading level. His tape scores were right in that neighborhood, junior high level. And he came and went to school. He started going to school. He stayed in our school for about 8 months, maybe even 9 months. And over that period of time, he improved his levels by 2 grade levels up to almost the 11th grade.
Wow.
And when he got done with that, he came, we had started our UPrep program, and we were teaching a business class. And it was actually interesting because the instructor for that class was an inmate that had been approved by Snow College to teach the course and give credit.
Wow.
And so he said, he enrolled in that class, and he took that business class and saw it as a way to help him with his businesses when he got on the streets. He became one of our volunteers, and he became a person who we relied on to help with different things in a program. And when he was done, we were good friends. When I was done, when I left, we were good friends. And when we first met, we were not. He was not. I was not his favorite person.
As you're able to watch his trajectory, the way that he went. I mean, you sort of tell the chronological, he this and then this and then this. What do you, as you observe it, what did you see that the change was? Why did he go from, I don't want to do this, you're an idiot, Mark, can give me an exemption? What did you observe that changed in him that then made him not only your friend, but saying, hey, I want to be a part of this system and help other people to get past it?
He saw our genuine concern. We weren't there just to make him do something or to be empowered, to have power over him or to have money. He just saw that we wanted to help him be a better person. And in the process of that, he lost a lot of his criminal mentality and a lot of his against, and he became more humble and more passive or more accepting of the fact that we just wanted to help. And when he saw that, he wanted to help. And so it really did change his general nature. I don't think education in the learning in the book sense is the total key to changing these men's lives. I think helping them have a change in personal perspective and personal initiative and personal values is what really makes the difference. And that's what happens when a person, as I recall, I think I left this piece out, he had dropped out of high school. And which was not uncommon. A lot of these men had failed miserably the first time around. They didn't want to do it again. And we gave them an opportunity to do it right and succeed. And I just changed him. And there's stories like that all over the place. I could come up with another dozen who said, hey, I want to be like you, Mark, or I want to be like this. I don't want to be this person anymore. I want to transform my inner personality and my inner desires. I don't want to victimize people. I want to serve people. I don't want to hurt people. I want to help people. And And I saw it over and over again. And no, did we cure everyone? And were they completely, quote unquote, cured or changed? They weren't, but we gave them opportunities, gave them hope, and gave them really a purpose and a sense of success. So
One of the things that has struck me in what you've said, and certainly in what I know about the prison system, and then just looking at 21st century everyone, is there's an element that is often talked about of accountability. And I know being able to talk to, I spent some time in working at the county jail in Salt Lake, and having the opportunity to talk with people. And it was always interesting because you could tell the people who were really making life changes were accountable. They had said, I did this thing, I'm making these changes, and kind of going about it. And then there you would meet another group of people that would say, oh, I didn't even do it. I'm not here, that it's because of this and that person and this guy here, and they're just trying to keep me. Talk to me about accountability, both what you taught, what you observed, and then how much it's an important part not only of this system but just in general to be accountable.
well, I refer to that accountability as coming to themselves.
Okay.
The book, the parable of the prodigal son talks about this kid who thought he knew everything and jacked up his life and left his dad and went off in the world and spent all his money and ruined his life. And then he came to himself and he realized that he'd been an idiot, and that what his dad offered him was a whole lot better, even if he were a servant, than what he was getting right now. So he put his hat in his hand, put his tail between his legs, and went back to his dad. And I call that coming to themselves. I think that's what you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the majority of these men have come to themselves at some point in their experience. I really do. Now the problem is when they do in the parable, when he comes to himself, he goes to his dad. His dad greets him with open arms, and he's given, doesn't give a lot of detail, but clearly he's given an opportunity to put his life back together. He's not thrown back in the pigsty. He's not pushed aside. He's given hope. The key is he's given hope for change. Well, what happens in the current system is when they come to themselves, it's a very vulnerable place.
Mm-hmm.
In a prison, it's pretty dangerous to be vulnerable. So instead of having an opportunity for hope and for growth and for becoming, they have to pull the mask back down over their face, and they have to go back to being a tough guy criminal. And it creates a cycle of masking and of pulling back and of not being able to jump into that change, because there's just not a lot of avenues for it. And so the men that you saw that had come to themselves, the difference with them is they were so determined to change that they were going to do it by their own will. They were going to say, I'm done with this. And there's a piece of that too. They have to get to a point, the bottom of the barrel sometimes, where I'm done with this. I'm going to live a life. I have a podcast and interview formerly incarcerated people called All My Friends Are Felons. And every one of those stories has a coming to themselves moment in it where they say, I am done with this. I have got to figure out a better way. And the ones that are given a path and a chance, it's so much better for them than the ones that are the crabs that are pulled back down in the bucket.
And when those of us that have never been incarcerated or been around people that have, we, just as you said, you had the perception as you drove past the jail, those are the worst of the worst, or you just didn't give them any sort of consideration. We have the opportunity to interact either knowingly or not with the people that have been incarcerated on the other side. And yet I think, just like the crabs pulling people down, we do contribute to that. Hey, I don't trust you, or where that person has been. And so, say they come to themselves in their time, they're able to get educated, they're able to come out, but then in a whole different sort of way, we put them right back in the bucket. But there is a part of it where people would say, well, how do I know that they have changed? How can I trust that, they've come to themselves and they're not going to do this again? Or talk to me a little bit about that piece. How can all of us that aren't doing this on the day to day, that may have the opportunity to impact the lives of someone that has made their way through the system and come out, family member or otherwise, how can we engage that person, protecting ourselves, but also be hopeful and optimistic that they have come to themselves and that a true change has occurred?
Well, I think that's a great insight and a great question. And it really comes back to a big problem that exists. If you think about it, if you're an average homeowner, or you're an average citizen, 95% of these guys get out, 70% of them go back. That's a pretty low success rate. And it's hard to trust. It's hard to trust. It's hard to say, oh yeah, he was in prison, but we're going to give him a chance. That's a pretty high risk. So it's pretty easy to defend that perspective of, well, how can I trust this guy?
Yeah.
If you own an apartment building and 70% of the felons that you rented to in the past have been let into your apartment building and they committed crimes against their neighbor, it's pretty hard to say, well, yeah, we want that guy.
Yeah.
It really is. And so I think that's a fair question. The answer comes in what the Department of Corrections is supposed to be doing. Imagine, Rich, if you will, that 30% of those people failed instead of 70. In other words, 30 went back, 70 succeeded. As an apartment owner or as an employer or all these different things, it would be a lot easier to trust that. In fact, I would say 30% failure rate, 70% success rate is probably pretty common to the norm, to most people, the average Joe. You put in your apartments, 70% of them are great renters, 30% of them are bad renters. And so the first thing I think really has to happen is the Department of Corrections has to change. And it is one of the reasons I got back into this space. I got out of prison. We kind of skipped this. I got out of prison. I wrote my book, All My Friends Are Felons, which is a book about my experience. Two inmates, Charles Gordon was one of them, helped me write that book. And I work in the criminal justice space. I work on a committee to try to create change. And, bless our politicians' hearts, the political machine is extremely slow in what it does. Last spring, a new director was assigned to the Department of Corrections. The director is the boss of the wardens. He's the guy where the buck stops. The previous three I'd worked with, and two of them were pretty good guys, but they just couldn't figure out a way to move the system because it's so entrenched. The last one didn't think the system needed to be moved. But the new guy is different. He's actually a man who played basketball for me 35 years ago.
What? That's awesome. That is a full circle. Cool.
Yeah, and he's a man named Brian Red. He's had a lot of success administratively in the state of Utah, doing different things. He was a patrolman for a lot of years. He was in charge of a program called Project Rio Grande in Salt Lake City that was helping the homeless population to reintegrate them into society and to eliminate some of the problems. That program has gone by the wayside when he left, but it was a pretty solid program while he was doing it. Anyway, he was assigned to that. And working on that committee, I went and met with him. And he was quite shocked to see the world I was in. And because of that, because of my faith in him, I started my podcast, All My Friends Are Felons. And I started to try to change these very perspectives. One of the problems is the men who succeed when they get out of prison, and women, they get out of prison, they just blend right back into society. We don't even realize they're felons. They live next door and they have good families and they live a good life and they get along. And so those people kind of disappear. So the percentage isn't 70-30, the percentage is 70-0.
Yeah.
The success rate is 0 and the failure rate is 70. In our minds, that makes 100.
Yeah.
But Brian has in about 8 months now, has really started to make some effective administrative changes and starting to implement some changes on the correctional level, so that the Department of Corrections starts identifying the men that come to themselves, that are accountable, and that want to change, and then provides opportunities for them to change. I'm involved with another program. I actually go back into the prison every Monday morning, and teach a class called Captain Your Story, which is an empowering lifestyle class that teaches people to deal with adversity and deal with their challenges. It's a great course for any person, but for a lot of these guys, they don't know how, when they get hit in the face with a problem, they just turn into a victim and feel sorry for themselves. Something we don't realize, most inmates feel themselves to be victims.
Mm-hmm.
They feel that way, and we think, oh, they're perpetrators, they're not victims.
Sure.
But they feel like victims, not only because of the way the system treats them, but so many of them were victims in childhood. They grew up in very tough places that we can't even imagine. Drug dealers all around them, their parents, abuse, living on their own, violence, things that that happens that doesn't happen. Does that happen that much? It doesn't happen in our world so much.
Mm-hmm.
So they grow up in hard places, and they see themselves as victims. But the ones that this program that we taught, that I mentioned, Captain Your Story, helps them realize that they can choose, and that they can be creators. They don't have to be victims. It teaches them to choose their friends more wisely and to associate with better people. It teaches them how to overcome the adversities of life instead of sitting down crying and feeling sorry for themselves. It teaches them how to take accountability for that, and then to change their world through a purposeful process. So those are the kind of things that will change this world, allowing these men to quit pulling them back when they start climbing out of the bucket, not just not pulling them back, but helping pull them out.
Yeah.
And the ones that want to be out of the bucket are encouraged and empowered to get out of the bucket and to change their lives. And they will. I don't have any doubt that the large majority, there's going to be some who don't,
Sure.
and you can't make them. You can't go and say you have to do this. It has to be a choice. But if they're given a choice and they believe that choice is going to be valid and has hope, so many of them are going to latch onto it. And then imagine 30% of them go back to prison, and 70% of them disappear into society and become our neighbors and become trusted people.
I want to take another break. When we come back, certainly part of that will be the 3 questions that we ask everyone who steps into the cultural hall, but I've got some gospel principled questions that I want to see how they intersect with what we've been talking about. We'll come back and do that in the 3rd block of the cultural hall. Here in the 3rd block of the Cultural Hall, might I recommend that you become a Patreon saint of the Cultural Hall. You can go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. We always like to use the clever little catchphrase of put your money where your ears are. But come on, where else are you going to hear from Mark Hugentobler about his experience? Is there another show that's doing it? No, there's not. I mean, sure, he's got his, but you can find this and other great episodes of the Cultural Hall. Over 750 episodes now, for crying out loud, you guys. It's the last 12 years of my life I've dedicated, and all I'm asking for is a couple bucks a month. Patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. You can set it yearly and then forget it. Think of it as a Christmas gift, an early Valentine's present. My birthday's in June. If you need a reason, there's 3 reasons you could do that for. Patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. As you're talking about the Captain Your Story and some of the principles about that, I'm like, cool. And also, everyone should take that class, not just people that are incarcerated. So tell me a little bit about how you feel within the language of the church. Certainly there is some overlap of things we talk about, like spirit prison and some of these other things. How has your experience working with these individuals given you a greater perspective of what God has to deal with?
In deep empathy.
Yeah.
I tell you, that's a very interesting thing to me, because religion is something that's very important to me. The gospel is, center of my life. Probably when I was a kid, it wasn't, because I was a stupid kid. But as an adult, I've always been there, and it's always been there for me. So that's a great question. And the thing that I came to the greatest realization about was the Christ's atonement. How it applies to everyone for everything. I think I mentioned earlier in the podcast that as a culture, we often kind of think that forgiveness ends at the prison gates. Forgiveness ends with the suffix felon, and it doesn't. In fact, and I won't tell you they're perfect. They still were not. Some of them weren't even living great lives at the time. But some of the most humble, Christ-like men that I've met in my life were in white jumpsuits in prison. They are. It really does apply to all of us. And what more? And this may sound terrible, but if it's going to apply to that person that's been incarcerated, that's committed felonies, that's committed all these things against other people, how much more fairly or easily can it apply to me, who I've not lived a perfect life, and I've made my mistakes, and God forbid I've hurt people, and all of the things we can all attest to. But that atonement applies to me, and I'm sure it does, because if it applies to them, it has to apply to me. And I don't mean that rude. I just mean that's a valuable realization that I really came to. So,
we believe that God leads our lives, right? Oftentimes you'll hear us say things like, he gave me what I needed, but not necessarily what I wanted, or, those sort of platitudes or those adages or whatever we want to call those things. You were pretty happy being a basketball coach and
absolutely.
Doing everything there. And then you have this shift. Why do you think that God?
Well, I know why he sent me there.
Yeah.
He sent me there so I could see this. He sent me there. I didn't mention this already, but as a basketball coach, I had some super amazing experiences playing in, championship basketball, state championships multiple times, region championships, big games, rival games, limelight stuff. It was just really a great experience in a lot of ways. Had a lot of challenges. It was, with every great experience, there was a pretty big challenge. But of my experiences, the best experience of my professional career was being sent to prison. It really changed. It changed my perspective of the atonement of Jesus Christ. It changed my perspective of who we need to love. It's easy to love the people that are lovable. It's a lot harder to love the people that are pretty prickly or that don't look as lovable. And like you mentioned before, you kind of have to be smart. You can't just trust blindly. You got, it's important that we protect ourselves, and it's important we make judgments. But it's also important that we have mercy and a little bit of grace, give a little bit of grace in the process. And I've learned that. It's empowering to me.
Do you think that younger Mark could have done it, or was it
no?
You needed to have the experiences that you had, and then in your, I don't want to say older years because you're not an older guy, but older than certainly you were when you were younger, in your older years, to be able to step in and to make this sort of change?
I don't think I would have. I could have succeeded. I think I would have been like I would have done my 2 years and done my sentence and got out, because I didn't have the experience. I wouldn't have had the experience of being a coach and learning how to empower people. I wouldn't have the empathy, the patience. I wouldn't have had the heart. My heart was young and hard for a lot of years, and the experience of coaching it kind of beats that out of you. At least it did me.
Yeah.
So no, I think if I'd have been younger, it wouldn't have worked so well. I think it came in the twilight of my career. It came at a time where I was humble because I've been sentenced to prison. I wasn't there of my own accord. So I could relate. And you mix that with my jump in with both feet personality. It just was a good mix. And I think God knew what he was doing. Those people that sent me there aren't my favorite people, but I've forgiven them a long time ago because it worked out so well, because it's been such a powerful, empowering thing in my life.
I think that's a pretty powerful example when we think about those things like that. A lot of people will lose a job and they'll be like, what? And then they, if they're able to just pause and or be able to see it from their 2 years from then eyes, they realize they got a better job where they're more fulfilled or making more money, or they don't have to do the commute or whatever. But in that moment, we certainly get really wound up about those things. God's in control, and sometimes we go, no, but I want to be, but it should be
Yep.
me, and it's going to look like this. And God's like, okay, go ahead and continue to think that you're going to do that, and when you're ready, you can come back and we'll do this.
I think that's very, very true. I think it fits this piece, and it fits all of our lives. God's in the details of our lives.
So
We forget that.
Let me ask you this though. We've had conversations here in the Cultural Hall with up here in the Salt Lake area. You can be called to like a mission in the jail, being able to be there on Sundays and helping with church services and stuff like that. Certainly people that are small business owners, they have the opportunity when they're hiring to consider hiring those that have been incarcerated. But if I'm just I go to my job that I'm working for somebody else, and I'm not super nosy asking if people have been to prison or whatever, what can just the average person that's listening to this do to help a system that, maybe needs some change, or to these people that maybe need not a handout, but a hand up?
Well, I've said for a lot of years that every citizen in the state of Utah, or any state that they're in, if they would volunteer in the prison for 6 months, it would change their lives. Just go be a religious volunteer. There's all kinds of different volunteer things that you can do that aren't religious. But you go spend 6 months going in once a week, and it will change your life. It will change your perspective, and it will change your understanding. It will change your empathy. It will change your willingness to accept and to realize that, yeah, there is hope for these men and women, and they need a hand up. So that would be my first advice: is don't be afraid. Go to the jail. Go to the county jail. My wife and I were in charge of the 12-step program in our state for about 3 years. There's 12-step programs in every county jail in Utah, in both the prisons in Utah. Just find a way to volunteer and just go give 6 months or a year of your time, one evening a week. It would change your life.
Do you think that that's because, and I sort of think this as well, like so many times we have those preconceived notions about whatever group of people, right? Prisoners, and I'm not saying that these are all related. I'm just saying that we don't get to know these people necessarily, but like LGBTQ folks, or, any of these groups that we're like, I have this preconceived notion about who and what these people are. And then we take a moment and we get to know them, and we go, they are not at all what I considered them to be. Is it just that we need to sort of personify these, and I'm air quoting, groups of people so that we can love them more? Or is it something more to it than just getting to know them?
Well, I think what happens is you find out you're more alike than you are different. If you take the inmates, for example, I started thinking, these guys have done some hard things. I could tell you story after story of some of the things that they did. I never wanted to know, because it would affect it could easily affect my judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And I preferred not to find out why they were incarcerated. But as I looked at their lives, I thought, I've hurt people in my life. I've made decisions that hurt people, or done things. Sometimes, a lot of times, it's my immediate family, my wife and kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to be a little less, they deserved it, or a little less, well, this excuse and that. I need to be a little more humble and say, I need to be accountable. I need to come to myself and say, they deserve better, and I should do better. Which is a huge part. The atonement of Jesus Christ is the central part of what we believe, and that's about change. We always think of repentance as a bad thing, but it's such a powerful tool. It's not a bad thing. Repentance is just change, turning towards God and giving up the old and picking up the new. No matter what level you're on, whether you're the prophet or you're not, they're down here somewhere. No matter where you are, the process is exactly the same. Forsake, turn to God, and change. And it happens over and over again in our lives, every single day, sometimes every hour or minute of every day. So I just think that's what happens. That's what happened to me. I started realizing, man, I always thought I was a pretty good guy, and I still think I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I also started to kind of take apart some of the decisions and some of the things I've done in my life and say, you know, Mark, that was not good. You needed to find a better way. And what an empowering thing.
You know, we've talked a lot about certainly your experience, and you know, people that are listening may have their own individual experience with those that have gone against the law, that have tried to change in their life, whether or not they were incarcerated. If someone is listening to this and wants to be part of what I consider to be a considerable reformation as far as the system goes, right? How is it best that they could help? Is it them contacting their local political leaders? Do they, you know, write to the jail or the prison in their area and say, what do you need? Like how can, because a change needs to occur because of the way that these individuals are treated, it's getting better. But, you know, if we're really going to help bring people out of the system to be, you know, changed, to be repentant, all that, you know, all that stuff, there are things that are going to be different. How would you say it would be best for people to encourage that sort of change?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to give an example. I've got some friends. I had one of the men who helped me write the book, named Brian Wood, was in prison. He grew up in a white picket fence life, got addicted to opioids from his doctor, and became an addict, and ended up doing 5 years in prison.
A pretty common story.
Not uncommon at all.
Yeah, very common.
Right.
Yeah.
And when he got out, his family had a hard time with him, his dad especially. When he got out, he had some people who were wonderful people who put their arms around him and helped him and kind of mentored him back into society. He got a good job. He's got a better job. Now he's got a fantastic job. And those people, the bald ones, just put their arm around him and said, hey, what can we do to help? And they mentored him to help him, you know, get back into society, get back into life. And stories like that are very powerful. And mentoring, you know, and you got to be careful. You know, you can't take a guy who's not come to himself, because it's just going to cause grief. But we need to identify those people that have come to themselves as they get out of prison and become mentors and help them. The church at one time had a mentor program. Dennis Wynn is now working on a mentor program. That he was incarcerated. He was incarcerated with me in prison. There are all kinds of, and you'd have to look in your area. There are places where you can go and say, hey, I'd like to be a mentor, and I'd like to help these guys. So I think that's one way.
Yeah.
Another way, again, is to go volunteer to be there.
Sure.
I think another way is to write your senator or your House representative, or both. And if you're not sure where to send a letter, you know, you can send it to Senator Darren Owens. He's the senator that I work with in our space. Just write a letter, say, you know, we want to figure out a way to help. We believe these men can change, and we want to support that, and we want to support the changes that Brian Redd's trying to make in the Department of Corrections to help these men have an avenue as they come to themselves to become good people.
Yeah. Not just a Utah problem, and not just a United States problem.
No.
You know, a problem at large, but certainly something that everybody can kind of get involved with in their own area. I like the idea of mentoring too, because it's pretty hard to not be keeping yourself accountable when you're, you know, walking along someone else and helping them to be accountable as well. There's something in the teaching of things, or of being the example of things, that makes you go, as to your point, you go, yeah, you need to make sure that you own it up, and then you do something and you go, oh yeah,
Oops.
no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. I am not owning this like I just told that guy to do. So I better own this the way that I want to. You know, our time is run short, so I want to get to the 3 questions that we ask everybody who steps into the cultural hall. I'll ask those of you now. The first question is do you have a calling right now? And if so, what is it?
In the church,
Mm-hmm.
I am. Let's see. I don't know what my calling is. I work with the priest corps.
Okay.
They change the names of that so often. I'm not sure what it is, but I am an assistant. Is that what I am in the priest corps?
It's your story. You're a priest,
Yeah,
priest helper.
I go work with the priests.
Perfect. If you could pick a calling for yourself, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
My favorite calling in the church, I've had a lot of different ones. My favorite calling is gospel doctrine. I've taught gospel doctrine for off and on different periods for 15 years.
Wow.
And I just loved it.
The last question that we ask everyone, we give you the opportunity to interpret it however you would like. But the question is, what is your favorite part of your faith?
Family.
Anything? Oh, go ahead. Yeah, please.
How the gospel focuses on family, on not really even eternity, but yes, but family now. If you look at our world, the thing that is being destroyed is family. Way different ways and different levels, and it's so important because it's the basic. It's what makes human beings different from everything else in our world. There are different families in different ways in the animal kingdom, but nothing at all like what exists in the human race. And I just think family is such a critical piece of finding peace and happiness in your life.
Yeah, well said. And a message that's sort of permeated through the time that we have been chatting, because when you say family, I think of someone who cares for me and someone who I care for, and how, you can't, or it's really difficult to have one without the other, but how it makes just such a difference in our lives. Mark, you can find a link to Mark's podcast as well as Mark's book in the show notes for this episode, in addition to anything else that we may have chatted about that you want to just find an easy way to click and go through. So, Mark, I hope that this episode nourishes and strengthens your body, that if you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, we'll be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.